Welcome to Good for a Chat. I'm Jo Taranto from Good for the Hood. And this is the first of a series of talks we're doing with experts, thought leaders, and heroes of the community and environmental movement. And we're so lucky to be joined by Dr. Jonica Newby today, who's going to be talking about her journey writing Beyond Climate Grief. Good for the Hood is a social enterprise that's all about empowering people to create community change. We are on an absolute mission to support and inspire and encourage people to create grassroots communities of change and to take action for planet and people and place. And we're so excited when we get to speak to someone like our guest today, because they help us craft what we do. They help us make our impact better, and ultimately they make us feel less alone. Now, we know that the work that we do at times is challenging. It's physically demanding. It's sometimes thankless, and ultimately it's quite draining emotionally. So today's talk is all about helping you to tap into some of those emotions and use them for good. I would like to acknowledge that I am today on Wallamadigal land. I'm sitting in the Eora Nation, and I'm bordered by the Parramatta River to the south, the Lane Cove River to the east, and I'm sitting in just reaching distance from the Lane Cove National Park. Now, this is what I call my heart place. It's one of many, and Jonica talks a lot about heart places in her book, which you'll hear soon. So it's my absolute pleasure to introduce you, Dr. Jonica Newby. And Jonica is a TV producer, writer, director and presenter, and for 20 years she was the face of Catalyst on ABC television. As a science communicator, she's been awarded several prizes for her journalism, including the top science reporting prize in Australia, the Eureka Award. It's fair to say that Jonica's life has been built on a fascination and love for the magical, for understanding the world around her, and really she's come to create a book because of the feelings and frustrations which are coming out of seeing the world and the heart places that she loves collapsing and crumbling. So how does someone like Jonica, who's interviewed almost everyone who's had an expert opinion on anything to do with science and the way the planet works, how does she move forward past a life where she knows there's some scary things we have to deal with? And what advice does she have for you, someone who might be doing something in their own life to create community change? Please welcome our chat on the 19th of March with Dr. Jonica Newby.
It's hard to get the word out. I'm just trying to talk to as many people as possible. And I hope that your lovely Hood audience finds something in it that speaks to them.
Absolutely. And I think, your whole career really, as we talked about, has been based on science, right? And
yeah.
What is it that has always inspired you to find out more about the world?
Oh, goodness. That's such a big question. Look, honestly, I grew up reading fantasy books and Lord of the Rings and those kind of stories rather than factual stories. So I think when I discovered science, I just thought, it was another type of fantasy. I mean, I did hope, obviously, that I would develop ESP at some point, and I was a little shattered to discover once I was at university that there's no evidence for that. Sorry, spoiler alert. But yeah, that mix of magic and wonder, I think you see a lot of people who are interested in science are also very creative and interested in the arts. So those things come together. Definitely. But shall I talk about, oh yeah, go on, sorry.
I was going to say, but you actually might surprise people to understand that you actually trained as a veterinarian. Is that right?
Veterinarian, yeah, I did. And that actually does have some relevance to the book because having had that background in animal behavior, I found that when I was with Catalyst, which I was the show I was with for 20 years, I tended to gravitate towards the stories and the research about what makes us behave the way we do. So I always saw this big parallel between animal behavior and human behavior. And more deeply than that, the fact that emotions actually guide our behavior, right from amoeba to your dog, who's, I believe, is still sitting on your lap, perhaps, I can't see, to human behavior. And so when I was dealing, hello. So when I was dealing with my own terrible, overwhelming climate grief, writing a book about our emotional journey just made sense to me, both with the science background I had with neurobiology and, really understanding what drives us to fear things, what drives us to love things, and how that might be harnessed. But also it seemed to me that there weren't really books out there that I would enjoy reading that that kind of address what I wanted to know, which is how do I go forward from here? How do I live a good and happy life once I know these things about what can happen, what could happen?
And I think you're so right. I have a bookshelf full, and I know that our guests today would feel the same way. They've read the books, they've heard from Al Gore, they've heard from Bloomberg, they've read the science of it, but then you come away from that thinking it's so big, it's so immense, and I'm one person, and now I'm feeling it here. What is it about understanding the emotions of climate grief, as you call it in your book, that helps us to navigate it, as opposed to understanding just the facts of climate change?
Well, I'll tell you a bit about the book, shall I, before
sure.
I answer that? Because the whole book is the journey of trying to answer that question.
That's true. I actually jumped in there because I thought, fair to say, understanding, focusing on the emotions is powerful, as I felt it reading this book. So I'll jump back. We'll get to that. We don't want to jump in too deep.
Yeah, because you sort of, there are definitely answers about how to navigate things that I found in the course of my life and the book, because they became the same thing. Because as perhaps some of your the people in this don't know yet, if they haven't read it, this book is a memoir. Like, it's actually a story. So you come along the journey with me and you meet the people that I met. And in doing so, the different bits of advice that I got from all these amazing people, some of it may not apply to you, and then this other bit sounds amazing and really connects. But yeah, you get to actually have a page-turning story and absorb the different strategies and ideas as you go. So that in itself was a really unusual way to approach a book, I think. And for me, as a reader who used to always read Lord of the Rings and things like that, I like my information embedded in a story. The fact books, I've had enough of them now. They actually just leave me feeling paralyzed, whereas I hope this book's really uplifting. Now, you've disappeared, Jo. Where are you?
Oh, good. Have I? I'm here.
Oh, no, now you're back.
I'm just gone quiet. It's so unusual for me.
Yeah, the joys of Zoom.
Yeah, I know, right? Let's get back to normal.
It's a bit distracting. Okay. Well,
right.
Should I start at the beginning and what made me fall into climate grief and why I wrote this book?
Absolutely. Take us back to when you started writing the book. Where were you and what sort of world were you in?
I'm actually going to read you a tiny bit from the book because it gives you a bit of a sense of what happens and how it starts. So each chapter, as I said, is an emotion. And the first one is called grief. So that's the plus, grief is only the first chapter. And then, there's all sorts of chapters like joy and humor, very important, and meaning and acceptance and lots of positive emotions in there as well. So this is Grief, My Love for Snow, a tale of magic, adventure, love, despair, and the fight to save winter. I've always wondered why I fell for snow, because I grew up on a beach on the edge of a desert, about as far from snow as you can get. Perth, Western Australia, 3,000 kilometres from the nearest mountains. Frankly, 3,000 kilometres from anywhere. So you think I'd be a beach babe, and I was. But as a little girl gazing at the white sand and clear blue water of Cottesloe Beach, somehow it was another white landscape that captured my imagination. a land of dramatic peaks and frosted statues, of sleigh bells and dragons and high-stakes adventures and the ever-present possibility of magic. My mind was being captured by snow. So you see, snow was something that I fell in love with even before I met it. And then when I moved across to the eastern states, I got to fall in love with a real snow place, Kunamanamaji, which is the original Narragansett for snowy mountains. And in between, you know, being a logical science reporter, on weekends in winter, I would drive in my Prius the 6 hours down to the snow on a Friday night and back on a Sunday just to be with my beloved. And, you know, I would have this sort of beautiful escapism fantasy, and snow was my heart place. And I think all of you could think of a heart place that you have, you know, be it a beach or a forest or your grandparents' farm or just your park or your garden. And these are places that you go to in your imagination as well as in reality. They're places that you love as much as you love a person. So there I was, this was my heart place. And it was somehow separate from my real world of logic. And then I had this moment in 2017, so not very long ago, and I was in Japan. And it was the first time I'd ever been there. I was on my first major ski holiday. I was skiing powder for the first time, and I was hanging out with Swiss ski instructors on holidays. And I had this moment where I just went, hang on, what's a Swiss ski instructor doing on holidays here? You know, it's January, his busiest time of year. And he said, I wanted to find good snow. And it turned out that Switzerland had a green Christmas that year. And I was shocked. And then later that week, half the Great Barrier Reef died. And I am a science reporter. I knew what that meant. I knew that coral that was dead, most of it was never coming back. And I looked around at the snow around me in my fantasy place, and I just went, it could come here too. And when I got home to Australia, I couldn't concentrate on the work I was supposed to be looking for and, you know, being a freelancer and so on. And finally, I just went, okay, I'm going to work on finding out about snow and, you know, try and maybe do an article on it. By the end of which, after a year of talking to all the top snow scientists in the world, but also finding out what was going to happen in Australia, I hit the skids. You know, it had gone from being abstract and intellectual to emotional, to the point where not only was I sort of leaking tears in public unexpectedly, but I got to the point of, for the first time in my life, going to my doctor for antidepressants. Now, that's the first story in the book. So it's obviously that kind of emotional gut punch / wake up call that often starts a different journey. And it was after that, you know, and I actually only took one of the antidepressants, and then I did something else entirely. I actually ran away, to heal. But later on in 2019, I was starting to hear similar stories from other people, and I just thought, I can't be the only one feeling this, and I feel like I can't concentrate on getting work. I want to go and do something useful. I'm a science reporter and a writer. I could, you know, try and find out for all of us how to kind of navigate this. And so I had this really great idea, which was that I would do something a bit like Lee Sales' Any Ordinary Day. And I'd start with my own story and then go into, you know, finding out amazing things from people like Missy Higgins and Charlie Pickering and those kind of people. And look, that still happened. But I started writing this in October 2019, which you know, Jo. And gee, all of a sudden, yeah, nothing was going on. All of a sudden, I felt like we'd fallen into the plot of Lord of the Rings, because there was like literally 20,000-foot climate fire monsters coming at us. And so the book became this really powerful narrative, as well as me trying to get all these answers, and a story. And of course, things just kept escalating. All of you remember how that happened, and many of you probably were in the firing line, because 10 million of us were directly or indirectly affected. I'm sure you all felt at times like you'd fallen into a post-apocalyptic film. And then my mum lives in Malakuta. So the last part of the book took this extra level of adventure, if you want to call it that, and this turn, and I found myself not only writing about that from a really kind of first-hand emotional descriptive place. It's joyful, isn't it? I mean, most of the tears are joyful tears, Jo, about the good in humanity, but also again asking practical advice while I was also, you know, dealing with all of that and talking to experts in psychology after disasters. And for example, so the back end of the book has ended up really talking about post-trauma growth and you know, how much meaning we get from these intense experiences that can actually make our lives richer and certainly make us really connect with the good in people, that when they see others in distress, they reach out to help, which is, I think, you know, all of you watching would very much relate to.
Yeah, I think we were just having a little chat before everyone else jumped on about the fact that that's a really universal feeling for anyone going through any grief experience or trauma, is that you do start to look for the good in the people around you and the ones that have helped or the ones. So why do you think then, Jonica, from your experience, that framing things from a place of love as opposed to a place of fear is more powerful for people like us who feel it heavily?
Yeah. It's one of the really powerful ideas in the book, and it's actually one that I started with. I knew we thought we weren't going to do any tears, remember? I'll try and quickly put a joke in, because there is a reason that I put a whole chapter in there called humor, because when the humor is so important, having a laugh with our friends is so important at the best of times, but at the worst of times it's even more important. And we saw that in the fires. Who were making the jokes? The people who just had their houses burned down, because that made everyone feel good and bonded and connected and part of a community. And that's part of our biology. That when we laugh, we actually share bonding, we create bonding hormones within us. Oxytocin actually is a chemical that is released when we laugh with our friends, and it actually makes us love them, bond with them. So back to that question of love, it seemed to me as I was starting this journey that most of the climate communication and most of the books you're talking about on your bookshelf are communicating through fear. And I get that, you know, it's what scientists feel when they look at the data and what they're trying to warn us about, to say, wake up, people. But the trouble with fear is, from a biological point of view, it was designed for short-term threats and reaction. It's literally designed, you know, those chemicals like adrenaline and cortisol spike and drop, and they have to drop, because otherwise we end up in paralyzing anxiety, which is not good for us. And so the trouble is, you know, even over the last year, you know, we all thought there was going to be this huge revival after the fires for climate, and then woof, we're in COVID. I can talk a bit more about that later, because I do think some really positive things have come out of that as well. But yeah, we have so as a motivator, fear doesn't work for us long term, even when we get a bit of a spike of fear, because then it kind of gets done over. But love chemically evolved very differently. You know, these chemicals of love that are in us, they make us want to do anything to protect those we love, right? And those are emotions that we hold lifelong. You know, they don't spike and drop. They're there to make us protect what we love. And just as we evolved to love the people around us, you know, from our kids, our family, to our broader community, and, you know, that love for broad community certainly came out in the fires. We can see it. We also evolved to fall in love with places. And I talked about my heart place, the snow. And so I sort of think that if we can get people, more and more people, to connect with something that speaks to their love, be it of the snow country, be it of, you know, a place like Malakuta, be it of Australian summer. I don't want summer to be something I'm afraid of in the future. or their kids, or, you know, whatever, then you ask yourself, what would I do to save the one I love? And you don't walk away, you know, or look away if your partner has cancer, which happened to me, and I draw the parallel in the book. You're just there for them, and you make jokes, you know, and you save their friggin' life when they die in front of you, which is what my husband did to me. Yes, his heart stopped while I was home, 2015, and this is the second story in the book, which is called Love. And there I was, you know, it was a miracle that I was even home, because we were down at this cottage, which we've moved to now permanently, and there was no one around. I hear this thump, and inside I'm out on the deck reading. It's a beautiful day, and anyway, I just think, oh, maybe I should check out that thump. And I go inside, and my partner of 20 years is, you know, lying on the floor, completely white, not breathing, just white like a piece of paper, and his mouth doing an agonal breathing thing. And I'm just going, oh my God, this is the moment he dies. You know, this is it on this beautiful day. And I'm flying to his side and you know, checking the pulse, and I can't find a pulse. And I'm going, oh, I don't know what to do. But I'm the only one there. And then after about 3 minutes, I think, well, I've got to try something, because in 4 minutes it's brain damage. And so I didn't even know how to do CPR, and I just started pumping, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and this line of pink went up his body, and he woke up, and he said, "Why are you crying?" And he's like, "I just fainted." But he'd had cancer at the time, and it was obviously something triggered by dehydration and the chemo. And it just made me think, when I hit the climate grief thing, that, you know, when you love someone or love anything, you, as I said, you don't let yourself slip into denial. You can have bits of magical denial, whatever keeps you sane. You can go off and eat ice cream, like I did a lot during that time. You know, there's lots of self-care, and life still goes on. Life still goes on while your partner has cancer. You know, it's not over till it's over. I just saw so many parallels with that, with thinking about climate action. Because if you just go to yourself, you know, what will I do to be there for the one I love, then that's a lifelong commitment to trying to do what you can about climate change. But I don't want that to make people feel like, oh, just more overwhelm. It doesn't mean killing yourself for it. It just means doing what you can. And then one of the bits of advice that's really important that I got from psychologists in the book is related to that. And, you know, they say, and they have this algorithm that you kind of have to, look, if you say it quickly, it doesn't really mean much, but when you give it time to absorb and actually read the book, it starts to make more sense. But it's, first of all, here's this little algorithm: first name the emotion. And I think for those of us that are actually feeling grief, it's really good to just be able to go, it's okay, it's grief, it's climate grief, I'm allowed to have this, and it's allowed to come back, you know. That's grief's like that. But, you know, that's a sort of known quantity, and it's a validating thing to do, is to name it. Step 2, change what you can, and that's the action part. And I think any of you listening now are probably already quite up there on the action part, but we'll all do a bit more each year, you know. But then the third part, for those of us that are already, you know, trying to work out what we can do, is accept what you can't change. So change what you can, accept what you can't. And I think that can be quite hard for people who really care a lot. And that's where we can get stuck in the overwhelm, and that can lead to burnout. So it's really important to not personalize the problem too much. You can only do what you can do, and don't beat yourself up too much for all the things you can't do, because you're not Bill Gates.
Yet.
Yes. Yeah. Some of you might be, I don't know, but I'm never going to be Bill Gates.
On the back of that, Jonica, I wanted to ask you a little bit about, we talked about before that, you know, personal changes are great, but ultimately pretty ineffective on beating the climate change battle. So I wanted to get, if you could tell us a little bit about what you learned about tipping points, and not just the tipping points about climate, but about social tipping points, because I think
Absolutely,
that's a really beautiful way that we can see how our impacts and what we do, however insignificant it may feel, actually does matter.
Yeah. So much to unpack there. I'm just sort of thinking where I start. But yeah, social tipping points, because I actually think we're going through one at the moment, which is actually really positive. And I don't want the book to sound dreary. The book, it's not dreary, is it? And it's actually very joyful. And one of the psychologists or experts, wise women, you know, because it's a bit of a theme of Lord of the Rings running through the whole book. One of the wise women that I met along the way said, you have to look for heroes. And when you start looking, they're everywhere. They're you, Jo. They're I no doubt everyone listening is all of us ordinary people in that moment that we do something for what we believe in. We are heroes there. And this book is full of people who are just really ordinary, but, you know, might have saved their house with 2 buckets. And so thinking about the personal versus the group action, how do you approach that without killing yourself emotionally? And I've come to realize, and I think that the personal actions that we do, they're relatively insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but they're super important for us as individuals, as people. And one of the psychologists calls this living authentically, and basically living to your values. And so I think those personal actions matter because they matter to us, that we know that within reason we are doing what we are trying to be better. But to say that that's all you do is not only personally destructive, because you end up failing, because none of us, we live in a fossil fuel embedded economy and life, you know, we can't fully get away from it. And if we spend all our time, you know, obsessing about how to find our strawberries without plastic, we won't have any, and beating ourselves up, we're paralyzed, and we won't have any energy left for the group action, which is super important. So I think you've got to do your personal action because it's living within your values, but not at the expense of group action, which is to tipping points. And most of the, you know, like the top scientists and so on that I talk to, as well as some of the activists like Anna Rose, who talks beautifully about courage and how courage is contagious. And when one person is courageous and steps forward, so does someone else. But yeah, these collective actions, they're at the heart of it. And, you know, even there's a magic number, which probably a lot of you know, because I know it's been going around the communities, but when you have 3.5% of the population marching in the streets, there is social change. That is a social tipping point. And when you look at the climate strike kids who I met, the Castlemaine kids, what a joyful story that is. They with the last climate strike before COVID happened in Melbourne, they did have 3.5% of Melbourne population marching in the streets. So, you know, these social tipping points, and I think we will look back on the 2020s as a time when there was a lot of social tipping point for all sorts of reasons. And I think that can make you all pin your active hope to this and make you all feel really proud of being part of these group actions that we're all doing, whatever group action it is that you do. One of the people who's a philosopher that talks about active hope, which is the philosophy I personally found the most useful, she talks about catching an inspiring vision and going with it. And we joke later, my friend and I, you know, if we all just catch one inspiring vision, we'll have this thing licked.
I love it. It's amazing. And I think we can all relate, right? Because when you are inspired, whether it's a concept or a person or an act that you've seen, it's captivating. You can't let it go. You're kind of addicted. Whereas if you're scared and here and what, you know, you're not moving. So I love that. I think the very first time I spoke to you, Jonica, you called me a magical optimist. And I don't think I've ever been more proud of a title in my life, and I think that's just going to stick. And it's about that active hope. It's not that I'm deluded about most things, but it is, right? And it's not, but you also put, I think, a pretty big disclaimer. It's not about being a denialist either.
No.
It's sticking in that point, right, where we're still moving, but we're moving with optimism. So
absolutely. And you know, it's a variation on what Christiana Figueres talks about in The Future You Choose, but it's because I love magic, I feel I need to think magically. So the way I do it now is I go, okay, I'm not going to shy away from this possibility that's terrible. And Missy Higgins actually talks about this beautifully in the book. She wrote songs, beautiful songs for her album Solastalgia, about really staring at the worst possible future you could imagine, and then stepping back and going, hey, look, I can survive that because of love. So it's not that bad. It's not going to be that bad. So yeah, holding in your head, on the one hand, the dire possibilities, but also holding, but here's this fabulous, you know, or the best possible future I can envisage from now on in. And this is my active hope, is my contribution to that future. And then you can sort of tell yourself magically that's the one that's going to happen. And it's not that different to what you do when you do have a partner with cancer, or you do have a bad diagnosis yourself. You kind of go, okay, it could be really bad, but I'm going to have this magical optimism that it's not going to be, because it's not the end until it's the end. And, you know, of course, when we're talking about the climate, there's all sorts of reasons to think that these big social tipping points are actually happening now. And I think I'm probably, like a lot of people, more optimistic than I was even a year ago or 2 years ago. I don't know how much of that is magical optimism, but hey, it works.
It's all a bit magical. Can I ask you, Jonica, I'm going to give everyone a chance to just throw some questions down that they might have. And if people want to, you know, if it's a, you know, relating specifically to something that's bugging you on a personal level, please throw it in there. We you know, it's an intimate group. It's 20 of our closest friends. But I would ask you, you just mentioned before what COVID's done and what it's shown us as our capacity to change, adapt, live. What do you think it's shown us that we're capable of doing, and where do you think we're sitting at the moment?
So I'm just fiddling with my Zoom settings. So
that's all right.
Bit there.
Excellent.
And I see you. Yeah, the joy is, hey, COVID taught us how to not use Zoom. Or use it, but badly is what I'm getting at. Yeah, look, there were so many. Hey, look, I had this great ending for the book, which would have been fantastic. We were, you know, 1 million of us were going to march on Parliament House in March last year, and support Zali Steggall's bill, and that, oops, no pandemic. So I think a lot of us had that moment where we thought, God, you know, if there is a deity out there, this is not very fond of humans at the moment, she or he, and so trying to recalibrate. But of course, what did happen is some extraordinary things that put us back more similarly to a war footing, which is what a lot of us who are concerned about the climate are wanting us to do, right? But the fact that there's been vaccines so quickly, the fact that our Prime Minister, who I think would be termed a minimalist Prime Minister prior to that, you know, at one point announces free childcare, you know, that was a pretty big shift for someone with that background. And, you know, none of it's perfect, and we all have a lot of issues at the moment. But the point is that those were dramatic individual personality shifts to do what they did, whether you think they did it the best possible or not. You have to acknowledge that these were big shifts. And they were social tipping points in that sense. So, yeah, we showed that the scientists could get together and make a vaccine in record time, and that people, especially in Australia, where we did actually have some coherent leadership, which meant listening to the scientists, we all actually, look, there were the protesters, there the anti-vaxxers, all of that curmudgeon group, but the vast majority of people wanted to sacrifice their own freedom to try and protect the frail and elderly in our community. And, you know, our sense of pride in achieving that, and pride is a really important emotion because pride has had a bit of a bad rap, because there's two types of pride. One's that, you know, vanity, but the other is actually the most powerful emotion we've got within a group context. And that's when we feel proud of someone else. Like, it's the biggest accolade you give to your child or your father, or, you know, your relative or your friend. It's, I'm so proud of you. That emotion is so important to us. We hardly ever use that word because we save it for something really special. And what we save it for is for when people do things that take a lot of effort and they sacrifice, be it their time or whatever, for the good of the hood. You know, that's actually what that emotion that you feel when you do stuff for your community, or you see other people do stuff for your community, that almost brings you to tears, because it's that beautiful humanity. So I think COVID has shown us how powerful pride is as an emotion, how actually when the chips are down, we do still come together as a community largely. And more than that, and I haven't even really talked about this much, but quite a bit of the book is about why we never think disaster is going to happen to us, which has a real sort of evolutionary basis. And then how we have to flip our brains out of that normal optimism bias when actually the threat is real. And, you know, my partner was a great example. He didn't even want to go to the hospital after I brought him back to life. And I'm more threat aware, I'm more anxious. And I went, bloody hell, you are going to the hospital. You know, you have to sort of switch out of your general optimism that everything's going to be fine. And I think having the pandemic hot on the heels of the fires has deeply psychologically, and, you know, we won't know this for a few years, but this is what I think. It's actually flipped a lot more of the politicians and business leaders into that kind of, oh, maybe disaster can happen. They're more threat aware. And I think long term that will help that social tipping point, because we've all got to be in this until the whole community, you know, is really coming forward to fight about climate change. You know, we're battling each other instead of the problem. And you can see, you know, bloody Matt Keane, how fabulous has he been? You know, he's been out there being a hero, being courageous, going, I'm going to stare down my colleagues who.
We have just seen a little Zoom bomb from your husband as well. Well, you said
he just Zoom bombed. Was he naked?
Pants on. So
that's all good. Thank God for that.
Everyone. Sorry, just a little Easter egg for you there. Jonica, I've had one question messaged to me, and I've also got one on the chat. So one of the questions was about how we manage climate fear and anxiety with our kids, because I know you spent time in Castlemaine with the you know, the school strike kids there, and you know, you were blown away by them. But obviously there's an awful lot of emotion wrapped up in that, and a hell of a lot of fear in kids, particularly secondary school kids, who think, you know, not only that, you know, that parents have created this problem, but this problem's going to wipe them out. And, you know, there's all sorts of unknowns out there. How do we manage that level of fear and anxiety without removing the validation that these are legitimate?
No, exactly. Without being truthful.
So what's your advice?
Stopping being truthful? Yeah.
Exactly.
Look, it's a delicate balance, isn't it? And that's why I specifically went. One of the chapters is exactly that. As you know, what should we tell our kids, and how do we approach it? And obviously, there's no one cookie cutter solution. But this is where that algorithm came in. So just very simply, to go back to that, you know, the validating of the emotion. So when the kids come up and express their emotions, that you call it anger or fear or whatever, and validate it, and then onto the action part of it. So there's been so much evidence, and again, I know you guys would be very familiar with this, that one of the best ways to deal with, if not the best way to deal with your strong feelings about this is to know that you're taking action. And so with kids, it's to sit down and do your things. And obviously, again, it's age dependent. Then the next part that's really hard, as I mentioned already, is accepting what you can't. And that means about trying to deal with things like anxious feelings and fear and those kind of things. And actually, yeah, there'll be a number of self-care strategies that could be going and getting exercise, doing all those kind of things, but they're not really going to fully address the question. So I would add then in quite a lot of the strategies that are in the book. So I'm just trying to think of them because there's so many, but one is really managing the good news versus bad news intake. And that there's something that Missy Higgins really, really emphasizes, and I've been so mindful of in my own life, is not doom scrolling and reading all the stuff that's coming from the climate scientists who are desperately trying to warn us and get the recalcitrants to pay attention. But for those of us that are already alarmed, that can be overwhelming and not useful. And so, yeah, I now subscribe to a couple of the places that have just good news. And so you balance out. And so that's very important with your kids too. And also that's actually where this Look for Heroes came from, was very specifically with the kids. And of course, the Climate Strike Kids action, you know, not only do they not feel particularly fearful when they're involved with that, quite the opposite. They have so much fun. You know, they get this real community. I mean, it's like the best thing that ever happened to these kids, so far from it being something that kind of is destroying their lives. It's actually motivating it and giving it meaning. But then back to that thing of, you know, the teenagers who think they're going to die. Another thing that's really important that sounds so simple that the psychologist pointed out to me is like, be careful of catastrophizing. And be really, and again, I can't remember the exact details, they're in the book, but be very, like if your kid is saying things like, and I did have this with a friend's 15-year-old daughter or 14-year-old daughter, you know, I'm going to die of climate change. Well, I, as a science reporter, don't believe that. So why should she? And you need to actually unpick some of these overblown catastrophizing thought patterns, because they're actually destructive as well. So sure, from here on in, you know, that it's going to get hotter. We are going to get more extreme events. The degree to which there'll be this scenario or that scenario is what we're working on. But you have to be able to reassure and ensure that your kids will have, you know, fabulous and meaningful lives. And some of the things that I will grieve, they'll never even know. That I sort of reassure myself that a bit, you know, a next generation, if the snow goes, they'll never have even known that country. I mean, it's devastating to me, but it won't be devastating to them. So there's a lot of positives there. But I think, yeah, you do want to address the challenging the cognitive aspect of it, address whether the catastrophizing thoughts are actually too overblown. So it is worth delving into that. And if you don't know as a parent how to even answer that, trying to find a teacher, you know, a science teacher or a friend, you know, a friend who has a bit of expertise in this.
Auntie Jonica.
To talk to your kids. Auntie Jonica, that's it.
I've got a really great question here, Jonica, from Nikki Carey, who's really involved in this space across North Sydney Council, Australian Association of Environmental Educators. And she wants to know.
Oh, well, she should have answered that.
I know. Well, she's come to you for some help from Auntie Jonica. Here we go. So she wants to know how we can use language, education, and activism to decouple the political, I'll read it exactly. If I paraphrase, I'm going to get it wrong. How we can decouple the urgent climate action from political rhetoric to achieve a bipartisan approach. There she is. Oh, she's going to jump in. Do you want to talk, Nikki? There she is.
Yeah, I'd love to.
There she is. I'll get
it. Let me put you on gallery.
Not a shy. She's not a wallflower. She'll jump in. Hi, Nikki.
Hi, Nikki.
Hi, Jonica. Yeah, I was just I was really heartened by your, the percentage, 3.5%. That's what it takes to see real change, which gives me a lot of comfort, and that all of that marching is leading somewhere. So but yeah, my question was about, from your research, and you've kind of touched on that, how can we use language and education and activism to kind of decouple the politics from the climate debate and have a true bipartisan approach that will achieve sort of the progressive change that we need in the face of a climate emergency?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this will answer your question, but look, as a science communicator for the last 20 years, I was always trying to reach across the divide and over to the group that, particularly, let's be honest, conservative voters who repelled by certain language that, for me, I take for granted to use, and that if you use that language, they switch off. I think that's less of a problem now, but it's still there as a problem. So I'm going to talk to you as a science reporter here more, rather than an expert on activism and language and education. And I have to clarify too, my father was a climate denier. He was a businessman. I didn't grow up with him, so I've had my lefty progressive mother, instill all my values. But I love my dad too, and his friends are all kind of captains of industry and that group. That he's still got many friends who don't believe in climate change. So he's always a fabulous lodestar for me, because if I couldn't persuade my dad in my communication, then I couldn't persuade across. I wasn't getting outside the bubble, And so I still feel like that. I think, some of the younger activists can be a bit, what's the word? Not looking for common ground enough. And that's a thing of experience too. So you just have to be mindful of people's trigger points. And Rebecca Huntley writes about this in her book. I'm sure a lot of you have probably heard from Rebecca and probably read her book, but actually being able to find your way into somebody else's space and what matters to them. I guess the other important thing on that, getting the bipartisan support for everything, is back to that look for heroes. In my book, I've got Mike Cameron Brooks and I've got Matt Keane, and there's a few ministers and others who get brickbats from me along the way, because you have to shout at the television when they're being complete assholes during the fires. But there's also, high praise for Mike Cannon Brooks. For Matt Keane. Each of those groups, I see it this way in terms of sort of epic fantasy challenge analogies, but they're bringing their tribes and they have to speak to their own tribes. So I guess, I don't know, within schools and so on, and you want to, get conservatives for climate actions, get veterinary. I just met the head of veterinarians for climate action the other day. All these different tribes that are coming and bringing their gang to the fight. Does that start to sort of answer the question? I mean, you may be more expert in some of this than me.
I'm definitely, I don't think anybody is an expert on this. Yeah, no, it does. I just
Can I give you an example?
Yeah.
So one of the women in my book, she's just got a small place at the end. She was actually going to be a whole chapter, but COVID came. And so my plan for the end of the book, which was going to be all these amazing entrepreneur women, was pointless, because that's not what happened. We're in shutdown. But she does have a little chapter. And she started this huge business. Her background is in banking. And from her kitchen sink, literally. And she started this business that now is worth 100 million and has got 40,000 homes to get solar on them. And she won't even use the word climate change. She uses sustainability, because only 5 years ago, her husband, who was senior in the Liberal Party, was a denier. So she is actually doing the job. She's probably done more than any of us to get solar panels on people's roofs, but she has to be really careful with her language, and she won't use climate change. She'll use sustainability. And we've had that conversation because I've said, you know, if your husband comes to the launch, you do know I will use the word climate change. Fair warning. And she laughs and said, it's okay. And, you know, she's working with Mike Cannon Brooks, and they are pushing as hard as anyone. So just because someone doesn't use the right language, don't think that they're your enemy. They are in the fight with you. And I think it's a really important thing, probably for young people who are very conscious of language, to be actually a bit more forgiving about the language people that are not like them have to use to come to the same place. Again, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think we need to also not be part of the problem of pigeonholing each other as well, and just I guess my concern is about that real national debate and being really divisive. And I think we do need to kind of ourselves as well drop that and talk about the solutions together, and just be part of taking the politics out of that.
Totally.
Thank you
and
so much.
It's what I did with Catalyst. Like one of the very last specials I made was about home batteries. And I think, again, I mentioned the word climate change once, and I put everyone in a suit, because I was actually trying to talk to I was trying to bypass that divisive debate and go, hey, this is the future, you know, this is what we can have. And that's actually how I met this woman, Catherine. Because if you frame it that way, people who might not admit, you know, that they've been denialists, they might go, oh yeah, but it's the future. Yeah, we've got to get on board with renewables, you know, whatever it takes, mate.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you so much, Nikki. I think Nikki deserves a copy of the book for her. No, although she's not allowed to accept gifts, but we'll talk. She might give it away to a resident, maybe something. Anyway, we'll
put it to the library.
To the library, yeah.
To the library.
Okay, beautiful.
Fantastic.
Beautiful. Wonderful. I think we're getting close to, someone's just had an aha moment, Jonica. You'll be happy to know. Being more conscious of our language, I think you've just changed my life. Thank you. So I don't know if we should leave it on that moment. But I guess I would love to know what's next for you, Jonica. You've got quite a bit of press, you know, and PR stuff. You've got Sydney Writers Festival coming up. Your book is out. I purchased mine through Harry Hartog, but I know it's in Dimmicks. I know it's online. You know, Glee Books. There's a whole bunch of, you know. Is there any other way people can come and hear you speak? Is there, you've got your new website up, I believe?
I do, yeah, because it's so new. Google may not find it, so try and find it. Jo's got a copy, but it's www.jonicanewby.com.au, and on the website I will be updating speaker events. But you know, if you're part of an organisation that wants to have a reasonable size event, I mean, you know, 50 people or more. Or even smaller if I've got time. It's just a time management thing, because I'm totally doing this on my own. I'd love to speak, because my motivation, look, this is the thing that I did instead of earning a living. You know, this is the thing that my moment of crisis, I guess, led me to, that it's like, well, what's the one thing I can contribute in a way that no one else can? And that was to write a very personal, very different kind of book. So I've deliberately not taken any work or looked for it for the next little while, probably for this year. And this is my gift of active hope. This is hoping that what's in the book actually speaks to people, and not only provides a validating story. It's like, oh, well, if she's been through this, you know, it's like, well, okay, you know, I'm not alone. But also in the course of the story, there's a lot of uplifting stuff without being in denial, if that makes sense, Jo. I think you'd agree with that. It's like it doesn't shy away from the truth, but it's actually very joyful and celebrates all these people that are just great, and they're just you and me, you know, they're just us. And I'm just honoring the fact that, you know, in a crisis we are most of us reach into our humanity and do great things, even if they're very small. Actually, there's a beautiful quote. This is a good way to finish it. That is attributed to Gandhi. It's like, whatever you do will be insignificant, and yet it is essential that you do it. So this is my little thing for the next while. I'm talking about the ideas in the book, and I'm just doing that because this is my gift of active hope to anyone out there who will find something that helps them in this book.
If you've got an idea for another speaker you'd love to hear from, let us know. You can reach us at hello@goodforthehood.com.au. If you haven't subscribed to our mailing list or follow us on socials, we'd love to hear from you. We are hoping to do this as a regular event. There's a lot of people with some amazing things to share out there, experts, thought leaders, just general heroes. And we've talked about the role of finding the people that are doing things to make us, feel pride. So thank you, Jonica. You have certainly made us feel like we're part of something, and even when it's hard, we're not alone. So very, very grateful for your time. I'll be talking to Nikki about how we can get this to the North Sydney community, and we'll be in touch. There will be a recording, and I'll also include some links to Jonica's website as well. But thank you for your time. We know you're a very busy lady, but it's great to see your face again.
Thank you so much. Oh, Jo, it's been a great pleasure meeting you. And just so you all know, what I'm doing in about half an hour once I pack is I'm driving to Malakuta. And if you, when you read the book, you'll see what an amazing and important place, story, community that is. And we're doing a special launch of the book because a lot of the people there, friends of my mum's, told me their stories for the book, and it's actually not like anything I've seen written in any other books. It's pretty amazing. I mean, I didn't even tell you about Nick and the disaster movie Dash. That's a pretty incredible story. Oh my God. You will think like you're reading. Yeah, you will think like you're reading like the plot of a film. And it's like, and that and the Enchanted Beer Can. I mean, some of these things you just couldn't make them up.
Exactly. Well, that's why life is magical. Thank you, Jonica, and thanks to everyone who's attended today.